They said an Omega is born to serve, to bow, and to remain invisible. But on the night of the Red Moon Summit, invisibility was the only weapon Sienna had, while the rest of the pack smelled wine, roasted venison, and lust. Sienna smelled death. She wasn't supposed to look the Alpha King in the eye. She certainly wasn't supposed to touch him. But when she caught that scent, a sweet, rotting fragrance that no other wolf detected, she knew she had 3 seconds to act. 1 whisper, 1 warning, and a choice that would either save the most powerful man in the world or get her executed before dessert was served. This is the story of how the lowest wolf saved the highest king. The floors of the Blackwood Manor were made of imported Italian marble, cold enough to freeze the skin off your knees if you knelt on them for too long. Sienna knew this because she had been kneeling on them since 4 in the morning. Mr. Spot, Runt. A heavy boot nudged her ribs. Sienna didn't flinch. She kept her eyes on the sudsy grey water in her bucket, scrubbing the faint scuff mark near the grand staircase. Yes, Beta Kale, I'll fix it. Kyle, the pack's second in command, sneered. He was a brute of a man, wearing a tailored suit that cost more than Sienna would earn in 10 lifetimes, yet he still smelled like wet dog and cheap cologne. Make sure you do. Alpha King Dominic arrives tonight. If he sees so much as a speck of dust, I'll have your hide mounted in the trophy room. Sienna nodded, keeping her head lowered. This was her life in the Silver Creek pack. She was 22, unranked, unloved, and entirely invisible. Her parents had died in a rogue attack when she was an infant, leaving her with no inheritance and a social standing lower than the dirt she was currently scrubbing. But Sienna had a secret. A defect, they called it. She was hypersensitive. Most werewolves had heightened senses, but Sienna's were agonizingly sharp. She could hear a mouse heartbeat 3 rooms away. She could smell the change in a person's hormones before they even knew they were angry. It was a curse that gave her migraines, forcing her to live a quiet, isolated life to avoid sensory overload. Everybody out! The king's convoy is at the gates! The head housekeeper, Mrs. Gable, clapped her hands frantically. Sienna grabbed her bucket and scurried toward the servants' entrance, blending into the shadows. But as the heavy oak doors of the manor swung open, she paused. The wind shifted. Usually, the arrival of an alpha brought the scent of rain, pine, and overwhelming power. And indeed, as the black SUVs rolled up the driveway, that power washed over the estate like a tidal wave. But beneath the power, threaded through the crisp autumn air, Sienna smelled something else. It was faint. So faint that if she breathed too hard, she would miss it. Bitter almonds, crushed cherry pits. It was a chemical scent, synthetic and wrong, against the backdrop of the forest. Sienna frowned, clutching her cleaning rag. She knew that smell. Years ago, she had smelled it in the gardening shed before old Mr. Henderson died of heart failure. It was cyanide, highly concentrated. "Move it, Sienna!" Mrs. Gable hissed, yanking her by the arm. Sienna stumbled into the kitchen, her heart hammering against her ribs. Through the swinging doors, she watched as the entourage entered. Alpha King Dominic Sterling walked in first. He was terrifying, standing 6'4", with shoulders that filled the doorway and eyes the color of storm clouds. He radiated an aura that made the other wolves in the room bare their necks in submission. He wore a charcoal grey suit, no tie, the top button undone to reveal the ink of a tribal tattoo creeping up his neck. He didn't look like a king. He looked like a predator who had briefly decided to walk on 2 legs. Beside him walked his intended fiancée, Lady Lydia of the Northern Plains. She was stunning, draped in red silk, clinging to his arm. "Welcome, King Dominic," Alpha Miller, Sienna's pack leader, bowed low. "We are honored." Dominic didn't smile. He looked bored. "Let's get this over with, Miller. I have a war to plan on the southern border. I'm not here for pleasantries." Sienna, peeking through the crack in the kitchen door, felt a wave of dizziness. The scent of bitter almonds was getting stronger. It wasn't coming from the food, it wasn't coming from the wine, it was coming from him. Or rather, it was clinging to him, like a mark. "Sienna, stop staring and start plating the appetizers," the cook shouted. Sienna turned to the trays of intricate hors d'oeuvres, but her nose twitched again. The scent spiked. She looked back at the king. He was accepting a glass of bourbon from a waiter. No, she thought, her breath catching. It's not in the drink. She focused, closing her eyes, letting the world fade away until there was nothing but the scent layers in the air. Pine, Dominic. Rosewater, Lydia. Sweat, Miller. Gun oil, security. And then, the bitter almonds. It was coming from the cuff of his suit jacket. Someone had dusted him. Contact poison. Slow-acting, but fatal if it touched his skin for too long, or if he ingested it by touching his food. Dominic raised the glass to his lips. His hand, the one with the dusted cuff, brushed against his mouth. Sienna didn't think. She didn't calculate the consequences. The logic that kept her safe for 22 years evaporated. She burst through the kitchen doors. The chatter in the grand hall died instantly. Sienna Miller, wearing a stained grey uniform 2 sizes too big, hair messy from scrubbing floors, had just run into the centre of the room. She skid to a halt on the polished marble, her sneakers squeaking loudly in the silence. 50 pairs of eyes turned to her. Alpha Miller's face went purple with rage. Beta Kale stepped forward, his hand going to the gun, holstered under his jacket. "What is the meaning of this?" Alpha Miller roared. "Get that filth out of here!" Dominic Sterling didn't move. He lowered his glass slowly, his storm-grey eyes locking onto Sienna. He didn't look angry. He looked amused. "Wait." His voice was a deep rumble that vibrated in Sienna's chest. "Let her speak. She looks like she's seen a ghost." Sienna was trembling. The aura of the Alpha King was crushing her. Her wolf, usually dormant, was whining in submission. She couldn't breathe. Her voice cracked. She cleared her throat, terrified. The jacket." Lady Lydia laughed, a cold, tinkling sound. "Oh, poor thing. She wants to compliment your fashion, Dominic? How quaint. Get her out." 2 guards grabbed Sienna's arms. "No!" Sienna shrieked, panic overriding her fear. She thrashed, her heels digging into the floor. "Don't touch your face. The cuff, your right cuff. It's poison." The room went deathly silent. Dominic froze. His hand was inches from his mouth, holding the bourbon. He slowly lowered the glass to the table. He looked at his right sleeve. To the naked eye, it was pristine, expensive wool. "Poison," Dominic repeated, his tone unreadable. "She's mad," Alpha Miller sputtered, sweating profusely. "King Dominic, I apologize. She's a mentally unstable Omega. We keep her for charity. Guards, remove her." "I smell it," Sienna screamed as the guards dragged her backward. "Bitter almonds! It's cyanide B! If you wipe your mouth, you'll die!" Dominic raised a hand. The guard stopped instantly. The king walked toward Sienna. He moved with a liquid grace, predatory and slow. He stopped inches from her, towering over her small frame. Up close, he smelled like a thunderstorm and pure, unadulterated masculinity. It was intoxicating, but Sienna was too busy trying not to faint from terror. "You smell cyanide?" Dominic asked softly. "From the kitchen?" "Yes," Sienna whispered, tears pricking her eyes. "Please take off the jacket." Dominic stared at her for a long, agonizing moment. Then he turned to his own beta, a man named Silas. "Silas, test it." Silas pulled a small white detection strip from his tactical vest, standard protocol for kings, though usually used for food. He swabbed Dominic's cuff. The strip turned a violent, blackish blue instantly. Gasps rippled through the hall. Lady Lydia covered her mouth. Alpha Miller looked like he was about to have a stroke. "Lethal dosage," Silas murmured, his face grim. contact powder. If you had eaten anything with that hand, or wiped your lips. Dominic stripped the jacket off in one fluid motion, tossing it to the floor as if it were burning. He rolled up his shirt sleeves, his muscles flexing. Then he turned back to Sienna. The amusement was gone from his eyes. It was replaced by something intense, something hungry. "Who are you?" he asked. "Sienna," she squeaked. "Well, Sienna." Dominic stepped closer, invading her personal space. He leaned down, inhaling near her neck. Sienna froze. He wasn't smelling her like a predator. He was smelling her like a man intrigued. "You have a very interesting nose, and you just saved my life." "It was nothing, my lord." "It wasn't nothing," Dominic growled low, for her ears only. "And now, I have to wonder, how did a servant girl know exactly what poison was used before my own security team did?" Sienna's blood ran cold. "Take her," Dominic commanded, stepping back. Sienna's eyes widened. "What?" "Take her to the holding cells," Dominic said coldly, buttoning his shirt. "And lock down the estate. No one leaves. If she smells the poison, she might be the one who planted it." "No!" Sienna cried out as the guard seized her again, rougher this time. "I saved you. Why would I warn you if I wanted you dead?" "To gain my trust," Dominic said, turning his back on her. "Get her out of my sight, but do not harm her. I will interrogate this one myself." As Sienna was dragged away, kicking and screaming, she saw Lady Lydia watching her. Lydia wasn't looking at the king. She was looking at Sienna with eyes full of pure, unbridled hatred. And beneath the perfume of roses, Sienna caught a whiff of something else on Lydia. Gunpowder and bleach. Someone had tried to wash away the evidence. The holding cell was actually a wine cellar converted for security purposes. It was damp, cold, and smelled of old cork and dust. Sienna sat on a wooden crate, hugging her knees to her chest. She had been there for 3 hours. Her mind was racing. She had expected gratitude, maybe a reward. Instead, she was a prisoner. She replayed the moment in the hall, the way Dominic's grey eyes had bored into hers. There was a pull there, a magnetic snap she had never felt before. The heavy iron door creaked open. Sienna scrambled to her feet. King Dominic entered alone. He had changed his shirt to a fitted black tactical tee, and the air in the small room instantly became heavy with his scent. He carried a folding chair, which he placed backward in front of her, straddling it. He didn't speak for a long time. He just watched her. "Sit," he commanded. Sienna sat back down on the crate, her hands trembling. "My security team swept the perimeter," Dominic said, his voice echoing off the stone walls. "They found a canister of the powder in the gardener's shed. Your fingerprints were on the door handle." "I cleaned the shed," Sienna argued, desperation rising in her voice. "It's part of my chores. I didn't put anything there." "Perhaps," Dominic tilted his head. "But you must admit, it looks suspicious. An Omega with no rank, no family, suddenly develops a nose better than a bloodhound. Who are you working for, Sienna? The Rogues? The Southern Rebellion?" "I work for no one," Sienna said, lifting her chin. A spark of defiance ignited in her chest. "I am a maid. I scrub your floors and wash your dishes. If I wanted to kill you, I would have put rat poison in your coffee and been done with it. I wouldn't have made a spectacle in front of 50 witnesses." Dominic's eyebrows shot up. A slow, dark smirk spread across his face. "You have a sharp tongue for an Omega." "I have a sharp nose, too," she countered. "Sharp enough to know you're injured." Dominic stiffened. "I am not injured." "You are," Sienna insisted, leaning forward, her nostrils flaring slightly. "Under the scent of your soap and the gun oil, there's copper. Fresh blood. Left side. Ribs." Dominic stared at her, genuinely stunned. Slowly he reached up and touched his left side. He winced slightly. "A sparring accident from yesterday," Stitches pulled loose. "You need to clean it, or it will infect," Sienna said automatically. "The dampness in this cellar isn't helping." Dominic stood up, kicking the chair aside. He paced the small room, running a hand through his dark hair. "What are you?" he muttered to himself. "Omegas don't have senses like this. It's biologically impossible." He stopped in front of her again, looming large. "Stand up." Sienna stood. She barely reached his chest. Dominic leaned in, his face inches from hers. The tension was electric. Sienna's heart beat so loud she was sure he could hear it. "I'm going to do something," Dominic whispered, his voice husky. "And if you lie to me, I will know." He placed his hands on her shoulders. His touch was burning hot. He leaned down and buried his face in the crook of her neck, right over her scent gland. Sienna gasped, her knees buckling. Being scented by an alpha, especially a king, was intimate. It was an act of dominance, but also of possession. Dominic inhaled deeply. He groaned, a low rumble in his throat. "Vanilla," he murmured against her skin, "and honey. Wildflowers." He pulled back, his eyes dilated, the pupils swallowing the grey. "You smell like—" He cut himself off. "Like what?" Sienna breathed, her body on fire. "Like trouble." Dominic stepped back abruptly, shaking his head as if clearing a fog. He looked rattled. For the first time, the Alpha King looked unsure of himself. "You're not an assassin," he stated, his voice rougher than before. "An assassin wouldn't smell this innocent. So you believe me?" "I believe you didn't plant the poison," Dominic said, regaining his composure. "But that means someone else did. Someone close to me. Someone who had access to my jacket before I arrived." Sienna thought back to the hallway. "Lady Lydia," she whispered. Dominic's eyes narrowed. "Careful, Sienna. You are accusing the daughter of the Northern Alpha, my intended bondmate." "She smells like bleach," Sienna blurted out. "And gunpowder. Tonight, in the hall, under the roses. She tried to scrub it off, but I smelled it." Dominic clenched his jaw. "Lydia was with me all day." "Was she?" Sienna asked softly. "Or was she with your jacket?" Dominic went silent. He knew Lydia was ambitious. He knew their union was political, not born of fated mate bonds. But treason? Suddenly, a loud explosion rocked the ground above them. Dust fell from the ceiling. Dominic grabbed Sienna, pulling her against his chest to shield her from falling debris. "What was that?" Sienna cried. "A distraction," Dominic snarled, his eyes flashing gold, the sign of his wolf surfacing. "Someone knows I'm down here. Someone knows I survived the poison." The iron door of the cellar hissed. Smoke began to pour in from the edges. "Gas!" Dominic shouted. He ripped the hem of his shirt, tearing off a strip of fabric. "Put this over your nose and mouth. Breathe shallow." "Dominic!" Sienna coughed, the acrid smoke filling her lungs. "Stay close to me," Dominic commanded, grabbing her hand. His grip was iron tight. "We're getting out of here, and you're going to use that nose of yours to hunt them down." He kicked the heavy iron door. It flew off its hinges with a deafening screech. Dominic Sterling stepped out into the smoke-filled corridor, dragging Sienna with him. The king was no longer conducting an investigation. He was going to war. And Sienna, the invisible Omega, was the only asset he had left. The hallway outside the holding cells was a war zone. The smoke was thick, acrid, and white, military-grade obscurance. "Stay low!" Dominic roared over the sound of gunfire. Bullets chipped the stone walls above their heads. Dominic moved with terrifying speed, his hand gripping a Glock 19 he had swiped from a fallen guard. He fired 2 shots. Pop, pop, and a figure in the smoke dropped. "Who are they?" Sienna coughed, her eyes watering. "Rogues." "Mercenaries," Dominic gritted out, reloading with a fluid motion. "High-end ones. This isn't a simple assassination anymore, Sienna. This is a coup." They reached a junction in the corridor. To the right was the main staircase, leading up to the grand hall. To the left was a dead end. "We're trapped," Dominic cursed, scanning the layout. "They're flanking us from the stairs. I can hear them." "No," Sienna grabbed his bloody arm. "Not a dead end. The laundry chute." Dominic looked at her like she was crazy. "We are not fitting in a laundry chute." "Not the chute itself," Sienna insisted, her nose twitching as she filtered through the smell of cordite and blood to find the draft of fresh air. "Behind the old linen closets, there's a service tunnel. It leads to the garage. The maids use it to smoke cigarettes so Mrs. Gable doesn't catch them." Dominic stared at her for a split second, then nodded. "Lead the way." For the first time in her life, Sienna wasn't following. She was leading. She scrambled toward the false wall at the back of the linen closet, prying open a panel that looked like solid wood. It swung open to reveal a narrow, cobweb-filled passage. "Go!" She shoved the Alpha King inside. Dominic squeezed his massive frame into the tunnel, grunting as his broad shoulders brushed the sides. Sienna followed, pulling the panel shut just as bullets shredded the wood where she had been standing seconds ago. Inside, it was pitch black. "I can't see," Dominic whispered. Even wolf vision needed a sliver of light to work. "I don't need to see," Sienna whispered back. "I can smell the oil from the garage. Follow my voice." They crawled for what felt like miles. The air grew colder. Sienna's knees were raw, bleeding through her thin servant's uniform. Behind her, she could hear Dominic's breathing becoming labored. The smell of copper, his blood, was getting stronger. His wound was reopening. "We're almost there," she encouraged him, though her own heart was pounding. They burst out into the cool air of the underground garage. It was silent. "My car," Dominic pointed to a sleek, armored black SUV parked in the VIP section. "It has weapons in the trunk." He started to move toward it, but Sienna grabbed his belt, yanking him back. "Stop," she hissed. "What now?" Dominic snapped, sweat dripping down his forehead. "We need to leave, Sienna." "Gasoline," she whispered, terrified. "Raw gasoline, and electrical wiring, exposed." Dominic looked at the SUV. It looked perfect, but he trusted her. He picked up a rock from the floor and hurled it at his own car. The moment the rock hit the chassis, the vibration triggered the mechanism. Boom! The SUV exploded in a fireball that shook the foundations of the house. The heat wave knocked them both backward onto the concrete. If they had been inside, or even standing next to it, they would be ash. Dominic lay on his back, staring at the burning wreckage of his vehicle. He turned his head slowly to look at Sienna. She was curled in a ball, shielding her head, trembling. He had underestimated her. Everyone had. "Okay," Dominic groaned, forcing himself up. He winced, clutching his side. His hand came away red. "Plan B. We take the truck." He pointed to an old, rusted Ford F-150 used by the groundskeepers. It was beat up, smelled of manure, and was definitely not rigged with a bomb because no one cared about it. Dominic hot-wired it in 10 seconds. As the engine sputtered to life, he hauled Sienna into the passenger seat. "Hold on," he growled. He slammed the truck into gear and floored it. They smashed through the garage gate, wood and metal flying everywhere, and roared out into the rainy night. But as they sped down the driveway, Sienna looked into the side mirror. 3 black motorcycles and a Humvee were peeling out of the shadows behind them. "They're following," she screamed. "Let them come." Dominic's eyes flashed gold again. He gripped the steering wheel so hard the leather cracked. "I'm done running." The chase didn't last long. Dominic, despite his injuries, drove like a madman. He veered off the main road, crashing through a fence and driving deep into the Blackwood forest. The dense canopy blocked the moonlight, and the mud made the terrain impossible for the motorcycles. He ditched the truck in a ravine and pulled Sienna out. "We walk from here," he said, his voice tight with pain. "The rain will wash away our tracks." They hiked for an hour. Sienna was freezing, her uniform soaked through, but she didn't complain. She was too busy monitoring Dominic. He was stumbling. The scent of infection, sweet and sickly, was starting to mix with the metallic smell of blood. There, Dominic pointed. Ahead, nestled against a limestone cliff, was a small hunting cabin. It belonged to the pack's game warden, a man named Old Thomas, who was currently away in the city. They broke the lock and stumbled inside. It was dry, smelling of cedar and wood smoke. Dominic collapsed onto the dusty rug in front of the cold fireplace. "Dominic!" Sienna rushed to him. He was pale, his skin clammy. "I'm fine," he slurred. "Just need a minute." "You're not fine." Sienna went into survival mode. She found matches and lit the fire. Then she raided the kitchen. No medical kit, just a bottle of high-proof whiskey and a sewing kit for repairing tents. It would have to do. She knelt beside the king of werewolves. "I need to cut your shirt open." Dominic looked at her through half-closed eyes. He gave a weak chuckle. "At least buy me dinner first." Sienna didn't smile. She used a steak knife to slice through the tactical fabric. The wound on his ribs was ugly, a deep gash that had torn through the previous stitches. It was angry and red. "This is going to hurt," she said, pouring the whiskey over the wound. Dominic roared, his back arching off the floor. His wolf surfaced, a deep growl vibrating through the cabin, his claws extended, gouging the wooden floorboards. But he didn't attack her. He held still, breathing raggedly. "Do it," he commanded. Sienna threaded the needle. Her hands, which shook when she was being yelled at by Mrs. Gable, were steady now. She had sewn torn hems for years. Skin was just a different fabric. She stitched him up, 12 neat sutures. Then she bandaged him with strips of a clean towel. When she was done, she sat back, exhausted. Dominic lay there, watching her. The firelight danced across his face, softening the hard angles. He looked less like a king and more like a man. "Why?" he asked quietly. "Why what? Why save me? You could have run. You could have let the poison take me. You could have let the car explode. You owe me nothing. My pack treats you like garbage." Sienna hugged her knees. "Because I smelled your fear," she whispered, "in the kitchen. Just for a second, beneath the power and the arrogance. You were tired. You smelled lonely." Dominic went still. He reached out, his large hand covering hers. His skin was rough, calloused. "I have thousands of wolves under my command," he said hoarsely. "I have armies. I have wealth that rivals nations. And yet, I have never felt safe. Not until tonight." He pulled her closer. Sienna didn't resist. She slid off her knees and sat beside him. "Lydia," Dominic said, the name tasting like bile. "She wants the throne. She knows I won't marry her if I don't feel the bond." She got tired of waiting. "Is she your mate?" Sienna asked, her heart squeezing painfully. "No." Dominic looked her dead in the eye. "She smells like roses. It's pleasant, but it's just perfume. You." He leaned in, inhaling the scent of her wet hair. "You smell like home." Sienna's breath hitched. "I'm an omega, Dominic. I'm a nobody." "Rank is a construct meant to keep order," Dominic murmured, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. His thumb grazed her cheekbone, sending sparks shooting down her spine. "Nature doesn't care about rank. Nature cares about compatibility. And my wolf is currently purring because you are near." He leaned closer. Their lips were inches apart. The scent of rain, wood smoke, and him filled Sienna's senses. It was overwhelming. It was perfect. "Sienna," he whispered. Crack. The window shattered. A canister rolled across the floor, hissing. "Gas!" Sienna screamed, scrambling back. But it wasn't gas this time. It was a flashbang. A blinding white light exploded in the room, followed by a deafening bang. Sienna screamed, covering her ears. The door was kicked in. Figures in tactical gear stormed the cabin. Dominic roared, trying to stand, trying to shift, but the blood loss and the shock were too much. A taser dart hit him in the chest. He convulsed and went down. "Secure the target," a voice shouted. It was Beta Kale. Sienna tried to run for the back door, but a heavy hand grabbed her hair, yanking her back. She cried out as she was thrown to the floor next to Dominic. Kyle loomed over them, a cruel smile on his face. Behind him, walking in with an umbrella to shield herself from the rain, was Lady Lydia. She looked impeccable, not a hair out of place. "Oh," Lydia sneered, looking down at the unconscious king and the trembling maid. "Look at them. Playing doctor, how domestic." "What do we do with the girl?" Kyle asked, unholstering his pistol. Lydia looked at Sienna with cold, dead eyes. "The king needs to die of complications from his injuries during a rogue attack. Tragically," she tapped her chin, "the girl, well, we need a scapegoat, don't we? The deranged Omega who poisoned him and then kidnapped him?" Lydia crouched down, grabbing Sienna's chin with painful force. "You have a good nose, little rat," Lydia hissed. "Too bad you couldn't smell your own grave." "Kill her," Lydia commanded, standing up. "And make it look messy." Kyle raised the gun, aiming right between Sienna's eyes. Sienna didn't close her eyes. She stared at the gun barrel. She smelled the gun oil. She smelled Kyle's sweat. And then she smelled something else. Something outside. Hundreds of somethings. Wet fur. Pine. Rage. "Wait," Sienna whispered. Kyle paused, finger on the trigger. "Any last words?" "You're surrounded," Sienna said, a strange calm washing over her. "What?" Kyle laughed. "By who? The squirrels?" "No," Sienna smiled, her eyes flashing a brilliant, unexpected violet color. The mark of a gamma bloodline waking up. "By the Royal Guard." Before Kale could process the words, the wall of the cabin didn't just break, it exploded inward. A massive black wolf, the size of a horse, crashed through the timber, jaws snapping around Kyle's arm. The cabin became a slaughterhouse in seconds. Sienna had been right. It wasn't just the Royal Guard. It was Dominic's elite unit, the Shadows. They had tracked the tracker in Dominic's watch, a tracker he had activated right before the flashbang went off. Wolves tore through the mercenaries. Screams filled the air. Lydia screamed, dropping her umbrella, scrambling backward over the broken glass. "I am the future queen. You cannot touch me." The massive black wolf, Silas, Dominic's loyal beta, shifted back into human form, naked and covered in blood. He spat out a chunk of Kale's suit. "You are under arrest for high treason," Silas growled. Dominic groaned, pushing himself up. The taser shock was wearing off. He looked around the room, his eyes wild, until they landed on Sienna. She was huddled in the corner, unharmed but shaking. He crawled to her, ignoring his bleeding side. "Sienna?" "I'm okay," she wept, throwing her arms around his neck. "I'm okay." Dominic buried his face in her neck, breathing her in, grounding himself. Then he stood up, pulling her with him. He turned to Lydia, who was now being held by 2 guards. The storm outside was raging, but the storm inside Dominic was worse. "Take her back to the manor," Dominic said, his voice deadly quiet. "Call the council. We end this tonight." 2 hours later, the grand hall of Blackwood Manor was packed. Every alpha from the surrounding territories had been summoned via emergency decree. They stood in a circle, murmuring. In the center, Lady Lydia and Alpha Miller, who had been dragged from his bed, were kneeling, bound in silver chains. Dominic sat on the throne at the head of the room. He had been cleaned up, his wound restitched by a real doctor, and he wore fresh clothes. But he didn't look civilized. He looked like an executioner. And sitting on a smaller chair right beside him, dressed in a clean velvet gown that Silas had procured, was Sienna. The murmurs grew louder. An Omega? On the dais? Beside the king? "Silence!" Dominic's voice boomed. The room froze. "Tonight an attempt was made on my life," Dominic announced. "Not by rogues, but by those sworn to me." He pointed at Lydia. "Lydia of the Northern Plains. You poisoned my cuffs. You hired mercenaries. You bombed my estate." "Lies!" Lydia shrieked, her face pale. "Where is the proof? You trust the word of a floor scrubber over a high-born lady?" "I trust her," Dominic said simply. "But we have more than her word." Silas stepped forward, holding a tablet. "We recovered Beta Kale's phone from his body. It contains text messages, bank transfers to the mercenaries, and a recorded call with you, Lydia, authorizing the hit." The color drained from Lydia's face completely. Alpha Miller started sobbing. "She made me do it. She promised me the Southern Territories." Dominic stood up. He walked down the steps of the dais. He stopped in front of Lydia. "You wanted power," Dominic said softly. "You wanted to be queen. But a queen protects the pack. A queen senses danger. She does not create it." He turned to the crowd. "This woman is stripped of her rank. She is stripped of her name. She is exiled to the wastelands. If she returns, she dies." The guards dragged Lydia away, kicking and screaming curses. Dominic turned to the crowd. He took a deep breath. "There is one more matter." He turned back to Sienna. He held out his hand. Sienna hesitated. The entire room was watching. She was just a maid. She had scrubbed the very floor she was now standing on. "Come here," Dominic commanded gently. Sienna stood and walked down the steps. She took his hand. "This woman," Dominic announced, his voice ringing with pride. "Sienna, she has no family name. She has no rank. But tonight, she saw what you missed. She heard what you ignored. She smelled the death you were too busy drinking wine to notice." He knelt. The King of Alphas knelt on one knee before the Omega maid. Gasps filled the room. "Sienna," Dominic said, looking up at her with adoring eyes. "You saved my life. You saved my soul. I don't care about politics. I don't care about bloodlines. I know what my wolf wants." He pulled a ring from his pocket, his signet ring, heavy gold with the crest of the royal house. "I cannot make you a queen tonight," he said. "That takes time. But I can make you mine. Will you accept me as your mate?" Sienna looked down at him. She looked at the faces of the people who had mocked her, kicked her, and ignored her for years. They were all bowing now. She looked at Dominic. She didn't smell almonds anymore. She didn't smell blood. She smelled pine and rain and a future. "Yes," she whispered. "I will." Dominic stood and kissed her. It was a kiss that sealed the bond, a kiss that sent a shockwave of power through the room. And in that moment, Sienna's eyes flashed violet again. Someone in the crowd gasped. "The violet eyes! The lost bloodline of the seers!" Dominic pulled back, looking at her eyes. He smiled. "It seems, my love, you were never really an Omega at all." The morning after the trial, Sienna did not wake up to the sound of Mrs. Gable banging a wooden spoon against a bucket. She did not wake up to the smell of mildew and damp stone in the servants' quarters. She woke up drowning in silk. The sheets were a thread count she hadn't known existed, cool and smooth against her skin. The air smelled of sandalwood, rain, and the rich masculine scent of the Alpha King. Sienna shot up in bed, gasping, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. For a split second, the old instincts kicked in. "I'm late. I'm going to be punished. I missed the morning briefing." She scrambled to the edge of the massive bed, her feet hitting the plush rug. She looked down at her hands. They were clean. No blisters, no calluses from scrubbing brushes. And on her finger, heavy and golden, sat the signet ring of the House of Sterling. "Breathe!" A deep voice rumbled from the balcony. Sienna froze. Dominic was standing by the open French doors, wearing only loose lounge pants, a mug of coffee in his hand. The morning sun bathed his scarred chest in gold light. He looked less like a king and more like a god of war taking a moment of rest. I thought I overslept, Sienna stammered, clutching the sheet to her chest. Dominic walked over, setting the coffee on the nightstand. He sat on the edge of the bed, the mattress dipping under his weight. You are the future queen, Sienna. You sleep until you want to wake up. If anyone has a problem with that, they answer to me. It feels like a dream, she whispered. Or a trick. I keep waiting for Lydia to jump out and laugh. Dominic's face darkened. Lydia is currently in a transport van, headed for the wastelands. She will never hurt you again. And as for this being a dream, he reached out, taking her hand and bringing it to his lips. He kissed her knuckles, his eyes flashing that warm, molten amber. Does this feel like a dream? The spark that shot up her arm was grounding. It was real. No, she breathed. Good. Dominic stood up, pulling her with him. Because we have work to do. The council is waiting, and they are unsettled. The council chamber was a room of intimidation. High ceilings, dark oak paneling, and portraits of dead alphas staring down in judgment. 12 men and women sat around the circular table. These were the leaders of the Allied territories, the power brokers of the werewolf world. When Sienna walked in, holding Dominic's arm, the silence was deafening. She wore a navy blue dress that Silas had procured for her. Simple, elegant, authoritative. But she felt small. She could smell their judgment. Old leather, the elder on the left. Cigar smoke and skepticism, the alpha from the east. Fear, the woman near the window. King Dominic, Elder Thorne spoke first. He was a man of tradition, with white hair and a face carved from granite. We respect your authority, but this irregularity cannot stand. Dominic remained standing, his hand resting protectively on the small of Sienna's back. Speak plainly, Thorne. She is an Omega, Thorne said, not looking at Sienna, as if she were a piece of furniture. She has no bloodline, no training. You cannot simply place a servant on the moon throne. The Luna must be a warrior. She must be able to hold the pack together when the Alpha is away. This girl, she cleans floors. Sienna felt Dominic's muscles coil. He was about to explode. He was about to tear Thorne apart for the insult. She squeezed his hand. Wait. Sienna stepped forward, releasing Dominic's arm. The council members blinked, surprised by her movement. You say I have no bloodline, Sienna said, her voice shaking slightly before she steadied it. She focused on the scents in the room, the sensory map of the world that only she could see. And you say I cannot hold the pack together. She turned to Elder Thorne. You smell of peppermint and ink, she said softly. But underneath that, you smell of belladonna, the same poison used to numb the senses of an alpha during a challenge. Thorne's eyes widened. How dare you? You have a vial of it in your jacket pocket, Sienna continued, her voice gaining strength. You've been dosing your own grandson to keep him compliant, haven't you? So he doesn't challenge you for your seat. The room gasped. Thorne went pale, his hand instinctively going to his pocket. Sienna turned to the woman near the window, Alpha Mara. And you, Sienna said, you smell of fear. And wet dog. Not your own. You've been meeting with the rogues near the river. You're paying them protection money because you can't defend your borders. Mara stood up, knocking her chair over. That is a lie. Is it? Sienna tilted her head. Her eyes, usually a warm brown, began to shimmer. The violet hue, the mark of the seer, bled into her irises. Because I can smell the currency on your hands, old bills, buried underground. She looked around the table. I may have scrubbed floors, Sienna said, her voice ringing clear and cold as a bell. But while I was scrubbing, I was listening, I was smelling. I know every secret in this house. I know every lie you tell. An alpha leads with strength. But a Luna? A Luna leads with truth, and you cannot hide the truth from me. Dominic watched her, a look of pure, unadulterated awe on his face. The violet eyes, Elder Thorne whispered, sinking back into his chair, defeated. The lost bloodline of the Andalus. The moon-blessed seers. I thought they were extinct, another council member murmured. They were hunted down a century ago. One survived, Dominic said, stepping up beside Sienna. He placed a hand on her shoulder. Her parents hid her amongst the Omegas to keep her safe. They died protecting her secret. But she is no Omega. She is a Gamma of the royal line, and she is my mate. Dominic looked at the council. Now, does anyone else wish to question her qualifications? Silence. Then, slowly, Elder Thorne bowed his head. No, my king. We accept her. One by one, the council members bowed. Sienna let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. She hadn't used violence. She hadn't used a command. She had used the very thing she had been ashamed of her whole life. Her sensitivity. The days leading up to the coronation were a blur of activity. But for the first time, Sienna wasn't on the sidelines. She was the center of it. She reorganized the household staff, firing the abusive beta supervisors and promoting the hard-working Omegas she had worked beside for years. She established a new security protocol based on scent perimeters, training the guards to look for chemical markers rather than just physical threats. But the hardest part was the internal transition. One evening, 2 nights before the ceremony, Sienna found herself walking down the servants' corridor. It was empty. She stopped in front of the door to the mop closet. She opened it. The smell of bleach and old grey water hit her. It was a smell that used to mean safety. It used to be the only place she could hide from Beta Kale's kicks or Mrs. Gable's screaming. You don't belong there anymore. Sienna turned. It was Silas, the royal Beta. He was holding a garment bag. I know, Sienna said, closing the door gently. It's just strange. I feel like an imposter. Like I'm wearing a costume. Silas walked over. He was a man of few words, a warrior, born and bred. He looked at her with a newfound respect. When you ran into that hall, Silas said, when you screamed about the poison, did you think about your rank then? No, Sienna admitted. I just didn't want him to die. Exactly, Silas nodded. Rank is what we wear. Spirit is what we are. You have the spirit of a queen, Sienna. You saved the Alpha. The pack follows strength, yes. But they love sacrifice. You risked execution to save us. That is why they will follow you. He handed her the garment bag. The dressmakers finished it. Dominic wanted you to have it early. Sienna unzipped the bag. Inside was a gown of silver silk, embroidered with tiny amethysts that matched her shifting eyes. It was breathtaking. Thank you, Silas, she whispered. Thank you, my queen. Silas bowed low, not out of obligation, but out of loyalty. The night of the blood moon coronation was cold, the sky a tapestry of velvet stars. The entire pack, over 5,000 wolves, had gathered in the amphitheatre behind the manor. Torches lined the stone walls, casting long, dancing shadows. Drums beat a slow, rhythmic pulse that mimicked a heartbeat. Dominic stood at the altar, shirtless, his tribal tattoos illuminated by the firelight. He looked ancient and terrifying, raw power radiating from him in waves. Sienna walked down the aisle. She didn't look down. She didn't hunch her shoulders. She wore the silver dress, her hair cascading down her back like a waterfall of dark silk. Her violet eyes scanned the crowd. She smelled their anticipation. She smelled their hope. When she reached the altar, Dominic took her hands. His skin was fever-hot. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice low, intimate despite the thousands of eyes watching. "Yes," Sienna said. Alpha Miller, humbled and stripped of his former arrogance, performed the ceremony as the officiating elder. He took a ceremonial obsidian dagger. "Blood of the Alpha," Miller intoned, making a small cut on Dominic's palm. "Blood of the Seer," he continued, making a matching cut on Sienna's. They clasped hands, palm to palm. Their blood mingled. The reaction was instantaneous. A shockwave of energy blasted outward from the altar. It wasn't just a physical wind, it was a psychic connection. The pack bond snapped into place. Sienna gasped as she felt it, not just Dominic's mind, but the entire pack. She felt their loyalty, she felt their strength, and they, in turn, felt her. They felt her compassion, they felt her uncanny, supernatural vision. Dominic pulled her close, his eyes glowing gold. "I, Dominic Sterling, Alpha of the Silver Creek Pack and King of the Wolves, claim you." He leaned down, baring his teeth. It was the moment of the mark. Sienna tilted her head back, exposing her neck. It was the ultimate act of trust. Dominic bit down gently on the sensitive junction of her shoulder and neck. The pain was sharp for a fleeting second, followed immediately by a rush of endorphins that felt like starlight exploding in her veins. The bond solidified. She was his. He was hers. They were two halves of the same soul, finally stitched back together. Dominic pulled back, licking the mark to seal it. He turned her to face the crowd. "Behold!" he roared, his voice amplified by the wolf spirit within him. "Sienna Sterling, the Seer Queen, the Luna of the Blood Moon." The crowd erupted. 5,000 wolves shifted. A sea of fur, grey, black, brown, white, filled the amphitheatre. They threw their heads back and howled. It was a sound that shook the mountains. A song of acceptance. A song of war and peace. A song for Sienna. She stood there, bathed in moonlight, tears streaming down her face. She raised her hand, and the howling stopped instantly. They waited for her command. "We are one!" Sienna cried out, her voice clear and strong. "We are one!" The pack roared back. Later that night, the celebrations had quieted down. The guests had gone home. The manor was peaceful. Sienna stood on the balcony of the master suite, looking out over the forest. The wind carried the scent of pine and damp earth. But for the first time in her life, she didn't smell any danger. She didn't smell poison. She didn't smell fear. She smelled peace. Dominic wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on top of her head. He was warm, solid, and permanently hers. "What do you see, my seer?" he whispered. Sienna closed her eyes. She reached out with her senses, past the garden, past the forest, past the borders. "I see a future," she said softly. "I see pups running in the hall. I see a pack that is strong because it values every wolf, not just the fighters. I see happiness." Dominic turned her around. He looked at her with an expression of such intense love, it almost brought her to her knees again. "You saved me, Sienna," he said, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. "I was a king without a cause. You gave me something to live for." "And you gave me a voice," Sienna replied, placing her hand over his heart. "You gave me the courage to scream." Dominic smiled, that rare, crooked smile that was only for her. "Then let us make a promise. No more shadows, no more hiding. We rule together, in the light." "In the light," Sienna agreed. He kissed her, deep and slow, under the light of the watching moon. The story of the invisible girl was over. The legend of the Seer Queen had just begun. Wow. I actually got chills writing that ending. From scrubbing floors to ruling the kingdom, Sienna really is the ultimate underdog story. It's crazy to think that if she hadn't whispered that one warning, the entire history of the wolf packs would have been different. It makes you wonder, what talents are you hiding that could change your life if you just spoke up? If this story touched your heart, or if you just really enjoyed seeing Lydia get what she deserved, please do me a huge favor. Smash that like button. It tells YouTube you want more long-form romance dramas like this. Comment Violet Eyes down below if you made it all the way to the end, and subscribe and ring the bell. Thank you so much for listening. Keep howling, and I'll see you in the next video.